My Rights, My Safety, a workshop series on people with disabilities and the law. Workshop number 2, Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, 10th June 2021. Advocate Audrey D'Mello, Program Director, Majlis.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Nidhi Goyal. I'm the founder and executive director of Rising Flame, a nonprofit based in India. We work for rights of persons with disabilities, focusing on women and youth with disabilities. On behalf of the entire team and our organization, I would like to welcome you today to this very important workshop series, My Rights, My Safety. This is a Know Your Rights series. My Rights, My Safety is a 3-day series being conducted in English and Indian Sign Language here. We started yesterday and we will run the series till tomorrow. Every evening, 5:30 to 7 p.m., we come together and discuss about different laws. What do these laws tell us? What are our rights and protections that these laws talk about? And how do we even think about accessing them? These laws or these discussions are specifically geared around laws that cater to violence against women and persons with disabilities. What are these forms of violence that we want to talk about, and why do we want to talk about the various forms of violence? Today, yesterday we covered POXO, and today's session is particularly important and relevant in the current context. Since last year, all of us know we are in this global crisis, the COVID pandemic. And since last year, we've heard the word shadow pandemic around domestic violence. While we're all locked up in our houses in very different ways, what does it mean for people who have unsafe environments? What do these unsafe environments look like? What does this shadow pandemic mean when you live with a disability? Understanding forms of domestic violence, what they look like, particularly for women with disabilities. Are we seen within the law? And if yes, then how can we seek protection within this law, which says Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act? Here we today have with us Advocate Audrey D'Mello, who's Director Majlis, a legal rights organization based in Mumbai. We're pasting Audrey's entire bio in the chat box because we want to hand Audrey, where does it take us as people with disabilities? What do we need to understand really about domestic violence, and how do we identify this violence? Following her session, we will have a opportunity to ask more questions to Audrey. About 30 to 40, last 30 to 40 minutes will be a Q&A session. And again, while the session's on, if you have any burning questions, please feel free to already type them into the chat box. Over to you, Audrey. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Nidhi. I feel so honored to be part of this program and the entire team at Rising Flame. I work at Majlis. Majlis is a legal center for women and children, and we have been around for almost 30 years now, addressing issues of violence against women and children. It's a long history, it's a long journey. And one of the reasons that Majlis started was that there are so many laws to address violence against has been, a year, a decade full of laws for the asking that the government, through various campaigns have given us. And one of the most important changes in the law was the idea of domestic violence, because earlier it was seen as domestic violence is a very personal issue. It was an issue that should not be discussed in public. It should be private. It should stay within the walls of the four walls of the home, and it should not, actually talking about domestic violence was like, was like putting your family out there. It was almost like betraying your family, even though you were the one facing the violence. Our founder, Advocate Flavia Agnes, who started Majlis, when she first came out with her story on domestic violence, it was really a document to talk about what women were facing in their homes, and what it was to be a victim of domestic violence, and how there is a complete lack of support from even close family and friends who discourage you from doing anything about it. She first started the Women's Center, which is a center where women could come together and help each other and support each other. Victims of violence could support each other. Um, However, when victims wanted to address and wanted to ask for their rights, that was the biggest challenge. Because if you actually go into a courtroom, I mean, I don't know how many of you have entered a courtroom or a police station, and how intimidating that space can be. And her whole idea was that, if we have rights, then where do these rights get actualized? Because you can draft the best law possible in the country. We know now that we have disability laws, and how they are drafted, and they can be really, really empowering. But the problem comes is when you have to actually access the law, when you have to go into the courtroom and make a petition for your rights. That's the most scary part for most women, and that is where people restrain themselves. And so she studied law, and then in 1991, Majlis was formed as a center which will help victims of violence, which will help women and children victims of violence to access justice. The first time domestic violence was addressed in the criminal justice system was in 1983. And I just want to state on record here that it was not that before that anyone could abuse somebody, because our constitution protects us. The nature of our constitution says you have a right to live a life free of violence. So all of us, each and every individual, as a citizen of India, is protected in our constitution to live a right to life, the right to life without violence. But yet the understanding in society was that only addresses public violence, and private violence was acceptable, and that has been a culture that is not only in India, it is across the world. So what happened? The first time the issue of domestic violence really came to light was when women were being burned. I don't know how many of you remember, but the early 1980s was a time of what we call dowry death. Women being burnt alive because they were not bringing dowry to the family. And case after case, and if you read newspapers at that time, it was about a very newlywed wife, beautifully clad in all her finery in one picture, and a completely charred body, burnt and cindered because she was killed in her matrimonial home. And the issue became so grave, and the issue had got so much of attention that the government decided that they needed to do something to address this issue. And I want to say to you that it was in 1983 where the criminal law got amended, and they made particularly domestic violence a criminal offense. And the law stated that if any person, it says the clause is called the IPC section is called 498A. I don't know how many of you have heard of this, but it is called the IPC section 498A. It was A because it was actually introduced in 1983. A new section was introduced. And what did it say? It said cruelty to wives. And it said that any person who commits physical or mental abuse, whether it's the husband or the relatives of the husband, if they commit physical or mental abuse on a woman, then that is a crime and it is punishable by 3 years. That's a huge thing. That's a huge thing to add a section. In spite of Constitution protecting us, there was a need to add this section so that women and children facing domestic violence in their homes could have a voice, could actually see that there is a law that will address their issue. It's 40 years from that time. And where are we on that? If you ask me as a practicing lawyer, I feel that that law has completely failed women. Because how many people do we know, how many women do we know who walk into the police station, complain about domestic violence, and the police will readily record their case? Very, very, very few. And that's the reality. So what happened? Why don't women use this law for their benefit? Why don't they access this very, very important piece of legislation that took so long? It was a campaign of almost 10 years before it came. Why don't women and children go into police stations, tell the police officer that I have been beaten, or I have been emotionally abused, or I have been violated, I am not being, I am being emotionally abused by somebody not giving me money for my children to eat, or somebody, constantly taunting me and abusing me, or all the time threatening to throw me out of the house. If such grave violence is happening in the homes, why are women not using this law? And the reason is that, families are such delicate spaces, right? All of us know, we all live in our families. We love our families. We value what we have. And when a woman is facing violence, there is a feeling like, that it should not happen. But in most cases, what she will be told is that you should adjust. She's told that you need to adjust. Things will get better. You cannot break the family. Even though she goes to her parents and tells her parents that, please help me, do something about this. I am facing this violence. I'm getting beaten. I'm getting, emotionally abused. What will her parents say? In most cases than not, she would be told, you need to adjust, things will get better. And that there is such a fear that, the choice between being married and not married, the fear is so grave that it is the parents who also encourage and say, just save this marriage. Because without marriage, you're almost made to believe that you are nothing. What are you without marriage? And so this whole social stigma, this whole social pressure that gets created in women, that you need to quietly take this abuse. You cannot be talking about this. But there were a few women who tried, took that first step and said, I am going to go to the police station and I am going to complain about this abuse. But most often than not, when they went to the police station, of course, they faced a very hostile police officer who thought that they were the worst kind of women who were coming to complain against their husband. a husband who you are constantly taught that you need to respect, that you need to love, that family that you need to protect, and you are coming here and talking against your husband. So all the bias that surrounds this whole notion of a good wife, of a perfect family, gets projected at this police station, and thus this refusal or this hostile behavior from the police of why they should not record this case. The other important thing that happened was that women, most often than not, were financially dependent on this man. He was the provider. He was somebody who was the earning member in the family. And if such a case is recorded, and if he is arrested, then the repercussions of that arrest became so grave, because then there is nobody, there's no earning member. That's one. And two is that suddenly, from a victim of domestic violence, she is suddenly seen as a extremely she's seen as an extremely bad woman for having put her husband to jail. That she was instrumental in her husband going to jail. Nobody says that he beat her. The statement would always be that she was instrumental in him being arrested. And what are the repercussions of that? Him being arrested means the rest of the family throwing her and her children out of the home. And where will she go? Because her natal family does not want to take her. She doesn't have the resources to be independent. And then what tends to happen is this case is basically, you have to prove the cruelty, right? It's not enough that you go to the police station and you say, he has committed cruelty on me. Because that's only the starting point of a case. He has committed cruelty on me is the first stage. Then if an FIR is recorded, after that, the process will start, which is the investigation, because this is a criminal offense we are talking about. Then there will be a charge sheet, after which this case will go to court. And at court, there will be a trial. And what will happen in the trial? In the trial, you will have to prove, the prosecution, the public prosecutor will have to prove that, yes, such a violence happened. Now, you know, and I know how difficult it is to prove something that has happened within the four walls of a house. If it's physical abuse, there will be injury. But even when there is injury will have to be so much that you can, you went to the hospital and now there's a hospital record. Because how do you prove? How do you prove emotional abuse? Because the law says physical and mental cruelty. But at the trial, to kind of stand, because criminal trials, as you know, is innocent until proven guilty. So you will have to make a case, and the prosecution will have to make a case that this violence has happened. And even if the prosecution does a very, very good job of saying, yes, this happened, there was grave physical violence, there's enough evidence, and we proved that there was physical violence. What will happen at the end of this trial? What will happen at the end of this trial is that the man will be put behind bars. It will be a conviction. And women started questioning, but if he is convicted, what am I going to get? How am I going to feed my children? Where am I going to stay? And these became very, very crucial questions. And that's why I say that the criminal offense, even though it was a path-breaking law, it failed victims of domestic violence because they couldn't use it. And the outcome of that whole offense and the outcome of the trial was a conviction or an acquittal, which For her, it didn't mean any civil remedies. It didn't mean any, she got nothing out of it. And so it took the whole women's movement another 20 years to understand where the problem was. That how a criminal offense of domestic violence does not really give any relief to a woman. And that is why 20 years later, in the year 2005, we got a law which is called the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. I think it is one of the most interesting, I would say, piece of legislation that came in 2005. It has taken into account everything that a woman has been going through and then tried to address the problem. And that's why I say it's a very accessible law. It's a very easy to access law, and it addresses the concerns of women and children so that they can get relief. I'm going to share my screen right now, Nidhi, to take you some of the beneficial legislation that the Domestic Violence Act brought about. So I started with explaining the section 498A, cruelty to husbands, but I will talk now about the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. One of the things that the Domestic Violence Act did, and I think it's very important, is that it explained physical and mental cruelty. What happened in 1983 was that they just said physical and mental cruelty and believed that it encompasses everything. But people only caught on to physical and they never really dwelled on the mental cruelty. So the Domestic Violence Act actually very clearly defines what is cruelty. And I will take you through that section on what is cruelty. The second and most important thing that the Domestic Violence Act did, that it made it easier for women to make an application and file a case. Because people have a lot of fear about how do I access, how do I go to court? How do I start this process? And the application process then became very simple so that it was easy to access. The third and very important point is that it addressed that women did not need to go to police stations, because police stations are a scary place for women. Most people are afraid to engage with the police. Most people are afraid to enter a police station. And this law ensured that we did not have to go through the police. And they created a role called the protection officer who would help them reach justice. So just to take you through what is domestic violence, this law of 2005 called the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act has 5 very key issues that they discuss addressing what is violence. The first is physical violence, as we all understand it. Then it goes on to describe mental, verbal, and emotional violence. Now, these are unstated violence, which you can't really define. So it goes on to say how mental violence, how emotional abuse, how verbal abuse can also be defined as domestic violence. We then have economic violence, which is so crucial. You know, one of the biggest things that happen when there is domestic violence is the man stopping paying any maintenance to this woman for survival. You know, threatening to stopping giving her money, not giving her maintenance. And this becomes a grave hindrance because he uses the power of money to kind of control her. So economic violence happens in 2 forms. One is he takes her money. 2 is he refuses to give her money. And it addressed economic violence. And the last thing that it addressed was sexual violence. We've all heard and we've discussed at length how marital rape is not a crime. Please let me reassure you, right from 1983, marital rape is a crime. Let nobody tell you that you can be raped by your husband and that's okay. No, it's not okay. Because when in 1983, when they defined physical and mental cruelty, physical cruelty included sexual cruelty, because that is a form of physical cruelty. So marital rape is not okay, and here it defines it in more detail. And it actually gives it a term. So this is violence, and we have all, I would say, they say 1 in 3 women face violence. I would say it's very difficult to find somebody who is not facing some form of domestic violence. The other thing which I feel really important that it did, and one of the most path-breaking things that it did, is that any age, women of any age could access this law, and women from any religion can access this law. So, sometimes they say, oh, Muslim women cannot access this law, or it's not meant for, some kind of women. It's meant for every woman, each and every woman. And each and every woman from any community. The second more important thing is that it not only covered wife, and I think that is so important to remember, that today the Domestic Violence Act says it goes beyond wife and husband relation, and it includes all kinds of abuse that happens in the home. So what are the other things that abuse that can happen in the home? It can be father against daughter. It can be son against mother. It can be brother against sister. So please remember, today, after 2005, all women who are facing violence in their home are covered under the Domestic Violence Act. And I would say it goes a step further to address women who are not in a formal marriage. Because all women are not in formal marriages. We have relations in the nature of marriage, which means you don't have a formal marriage, but you're living like husband and wife. And even those women are included in the Domestic Violence Act. Who can file this case? How does a woman approach the court? The woman can file it on her own. There are protection officers who are appointed, and she can go to a protection officer who can help her file this case. And she can file it through a lawyer, a private or a legal aid lawyer. Let me clarify here that a legal aid lawyer, every woman and child, irrespective of their class, irrespective of their income, has a right to free legal aid. And this is provided to us in the Constitution and under the Legal Aid Act. So any woman can approach the legal aid for free legal aid, to get a free legal aid lawyer. Okay. Now you'll ask me, okay, this is all very fine, but what can I get after going to court? Right? Why am I going to court? What will I get? And the remedies or the reliefs that are available under this act is one, is you will get a protection order. What is a protection order? It's like a stop violence order. A protection order is telling this man that, okay, you have committed acts of violence in the past, but now we are telling you to stop the violence. Stop the violence. A protection order that he can no longer commit any of the 5 violences that I talked about previously. Stop the violence. And that for me is very, very important, because it's not criminalizing you for the past, but it is telling you that don't do this in future. The second thing that the Domestic Violence Act, the relief that it gives you, is the residence order. A residence order is an order where if you are thrown out of your home, then you can ask to be put back in your home. Alternatively, you can say that I don't want to live with this person. There are too many acts of violence. So he should provide me alternate accommodation. So it gives you the right to for the court to order that you should be provided an alternate accommodation. Maybe a place on rent. Maybe sometimes we have even got orders where he has been asked to leave the house and she stays in the house. So a residence order is an order that tells her she has a right to residence and he has to provide her that residence. Then we have an order or a relief called the monetary relief. And what is monetary relief? Monetary relief is a relief of maintenance. Maintenance in Hindi we say kharcha pani. Enough for her survival and as per the level of her standard of living. And when I say that, it means that, a lot of people will say, oh, she can ask for anything. No, but you can definitely ask for as much as the standard of living that you have been used to when you were in this relationship. So maintenance, which is what the courts will look at, is what is her need for survival? How much does she need to survive? And then they will look at what is the capacity of the man to pay that maintenance. The next important relief is the custody order. And this is something that women feared the most. If I leave the home, he will not let me see the children. He will not let me take the children. I will lose my children. So under the Domestic Violence Act, the right to custody of your children, that he cannot take those children away from you, is also a very important relief that creates a barrier for women to actually access this law. And the last relief that you can get is a compensation order. A compensation order is different from a monetary relief. A monetary relief is for the future. A compensation order is a compensation for what you lost. It is for the past. It is for the violence that you suffered. It is for the injury that you suffered. It is for the loss that you suffered because of that violence. And the court can grant a compensation order. And so I feel like this is really important to understand that the Domestic Violence Act is limited to this much. You cannot ask for property to be put in my name under this law. You cannot ask for a relief of divorce under this law. You can only ask for these reliefs which are protecting a woman within her domestic violence space. For divorce, for property, you will have to access other laws. Okay, important aspects of this law to remember is one is, what is the jurisdiction that you can file this case in? For example, you're facing the domestic violence, you have left the city, you're in another city, working in another city, living in another city, in your parents' home, you can file in that place. You don't have to come to the place where you were living to file this case. So the Domestic Violence Act doesn't have like a jurisdiction restriction that it can be only filed where this violence happened. The second important thing is that you don't have to wait for the final order, because that may take time. You can get an interim order. An interim order is called a stopgap order. So before even the whole, proceedings start and, the whole trial starts and all that, you can ask the court for an interim order. That while this is going on, I need protection. I need residence. I need monetary relief. How am I going to survive? And so you can ask for an interim order. You can even ask for an ad interim order. What is an ad interim order? It's literally a very, very quick order. The moment you file, if there is a grave danger, if there's a grave danger of harm, if there's a grave danger that he may be leaving the country, running away somewhere, you can file for an ad interim order. An ad interim order is literally even before the other person gets intimation. You don't have to wait even to serve notice. But you can say that this is really grave, this is really crucial, we need an ad interim order. And if you can prove urgency, the court will grant you an ad interim order. Then we have something called the ex parte order. What's an ex parte order? You have filed the case, the other side just doesn't turn up. He doesn't care enough to even come. He keeps missing dates. He's not bothered. In that case, after a certain duration, the judge can pass an order in spite of him not coming. It's called the ex parte order. They will wait for some time. They will give enough notice. They will inform him multiple times. And then if he still doesn't come, you can ask or press for an ex parte order. Lastly, regarding duration of a domestic violence case, it says that a domestic violence case should be completed in 60 days. Yeah, it's quite a joke, I would say, because nothing happens in 60 days. We know the pendency of courts. We know what is happening inside courts. We know what is, how difficult it is. Each step process, we are getting dates of 1 month duration. So 60 days is there in the law, but I would say never ever implemented, almost never implemented. Right? But if we can get the interim order, then we are safe, because even if the trial goes on for a long time, we still have the orders to protect us in the interim stage. I'll quickly go over the stakeholders of the Act. For people who don't understand Marathi, this poster is in Marathi. We also have this poster in English. So this is the woman in the pink sari, and it just shows that she is, facing domestic violence, and how can she come into the system. So the Domestic Violence Act says that many people can help her come into the system. For example, the police. Suppose she goes to a police station and she tells them that she's facing domestic violence. They are mandated to help her reach the protection officer, so that then she can know about the Domestic Violence Act, and then she can file her case if she so wishes. The other place that can really help her is a medical doctor. Sometimes, women go to hospitals, they go to doctors, they tell doctors about the problem. The doctor can see that she's facing domestic violence. Then the doctor is mandated to inform her about the Domestic Violence Act and help her reach the protection officer. The other people who can help her are NGOs, shelter homes. These are all the people who, if this woman goes to any place and shares her problem, they can tell her about the Domestic Violence Act. They can help her reach the protection officer. And then, as you see, she can also go directly to a private lawyer or a legal aid lawyer, and then she can reach court. Right? Because only when she reaches court can her reliefs be addressed. The other stakeholders can provide her timely relief. They can give her a shelter. They can help her, reach the protection officer. They can provide her medical relief, if she needs any medical help. But if we are asking for those 5 reliefs, then she has to reach court, and only then can she get those reliefs. I just want to share a few things before I stop. We have handled almost 75 cases of Domestic Violence Act in the last, 15 years. 15 years. And it's been a great learning experience. One is convincing women is the hardest, because she is so scared. I'm going to stop sharing now. But she is so scared of accessing the law, of saying something against her family. And then what we learned is that there are so many barriers because of which women cannot come and access justice. And we always think, there's such a great law. Why is this woman not coming? But when she even knows her rights, like she's reached a place like Majlis, right? We've told her about her rights. We've told her about her legal rights, but still she does not go forward because she's so scared. She's so scared about the stigma. She's so scared because for years and years, she has been told that save the marriage. Marriage is the only thing that is important. She has fears about her children. She has fears about where will they study? What will happen in the meantime? She gets scared about where will she stay? How will she maintain herself till that first order comes? And so if there is anybody who is helping this woman, one must always remember that it cannot be only legal. One has to support her both socially and legally. Only then can she come out of this violence. Only then can she face this very difficult system, but then she can think that she can leave this violence behind when there is somebody to hold her hand. I can give you so many examples of women who are, who have started off in a place of complete fear. They don't know how they're going to, stand up against that violence, how they are going to, what is happening, what is that next step. And what they're looking out for is somebody to support them, somebody to guide them, somebody to hold their hand through this difficult journey. And I feel you don't need a big NGO or a big organization to do that. Each one of us can be there for that friend. Each one of us can be there for that family member, to just say that I am here with you. I will come. Where do we need to go? If you don't have a place to stay, you can stay at my place. We'll figure this out together. I am your support. I know that, and that when women stand up against violence, the family completely deserts her because they feel like we don't want to, this is not the right approach. So be there for her, be her family, be her support. Don't judge her. Because before she even takes that first step, we've already told her 100 things that can go wrong. And so she gives up even before she starts. And then there's no use to have such a great act, or have this system that can address violence or give her her rights that is due to her. And I just appeal to each one of you that be that support for somebody else. Because if we have to end violence against women, we cannot just depend on the system. It is each one of us who will have to take that step, who will have to look at that family member who you can see so obviously is facing violence in their home by their father, by their brother, by their son. And I think, Rising Flame has got this amazing audience who has had the opportunity to hear, these amazing rides over 3 days. Use that. Use that to help somebody in distress. Use that to give somebody confidence that you can do something. And all it takes is supporting somebody, holding somebody's hand, being there for somebody to make that first step. And a lot of times I tell women that really the outcome of the case is not important, because that journey of accessing your rights, of standing up against violence, is such an important step. And we all have it in us to figure out our life. We will sort ourselves out. So whether we get that maintenance or whether we get that order, how long it takes to get that order, but that journey that she starts, you don't even realize how empowered she can become to kind of reach the other side. I'll stop
Right.
here, Nidhi.
Hi, Audrey. Sorry, I was muting, unmuting myself. I think that's a very powerful note to end with, Audrey, and thank you so much for taking us through all the details and the steps. We basically, at Rising Flame also last year during COVID's first wave, we conducted a research. And we published a report called Neglected and Forgotten, the link of which again is in the chat box. And you can find the report on our website. We have a section on domestic violence, and that the experiences of women with disabilities and what they faced during the pandemic. And they speak about neglect, threats, verbal abuses, um, and a few things. So we've none of the reported cases were about physical abuse, right? And that's one of the main things, because the projection of domestic violence, or from where it began, like you said, was about dowry debts, about killing the woman, about beating her till she bleeds, and things like that. But for women with disabilities, Audrey, it's very often, and if you see globally, right, it's not just in India. First is neglect, right, and isolation. So almost families behaving, and these are not matrimonial families, these are your own natal families, basically behaving like you don't exist, right? Or isolating intentionally when guests come in, isolating otherwise in life, purposely neglecting if you're celebrating everyone's birthdays, neglecting all your celebrations, withholding, sort of buying things for you because there's no point buying things for you. In our report, we also saw that now that food and essentials and access became so difficult, but particularly for disabled people, because if you were blind, you needed tactile feedback, and there was social distancing. Touch almost became taboo, right, in COVID, and became dangerous. And so assisting or seeking public transport became difficult. All of that, families started withholding food and essentials, saying that unless you finish all of this house chores, we will not give you this essential item that you need, right? So threats like this, these were reported by women with. This was reported by a woman with a locomotor disability. There was a deaf and hard of hearing woman who said that I operated on lip reading, and because now everyone wears masks, the contribution that I did at home around buying groceries, etc., wasn't possible. And so I basically became sort of the additional burden. That's what the family thought. And again, it was her own family, and her father basically abused her verbally extensively, saying that you're a burden, and other sort of abuses, which weren't shared directly in the report, but sort of got into verbal abuse situations. And the third example from our report that comes here is about a woman who's already facing domestic violence, wanted to leave her husband, had come back to her family, and her family said, now in this COVID, when we've lost jobs, etc., you're an additional economic burden. But she was not getting compensation, support, anything from her husband, nor was she getting divorced, and she had a young child. So we're looking at women with disabilities facing different forms. I mean, of course, that you explain, but also this whole global discourse around hiding of or withholding essential medications, which are not just, oh, my head is paining and I want a paracetamol and you're not giving me, but like life-saving medications or everyday medications, withholding assistance in cases of you being the primary caregiver, husbands sort of hiding crutches, breaking canes, white canes, putting away wheelchairs so that there's no access to exit. How would some of these be seen? Because the law is, of course, a 2005 law. Um, our 1995 Disability Act is a very old act, and now we have the 2016 Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, but this is a 2005 law. So, how do some of these particular forms of violence that women with disabilities face, are those covered under the law? And under what segments can one access, and how can one access? So, a little bit around that, and we have 3 or 4 more questions, Audrey, for you. This is the first question.
So, Nidhi, I think what is very important for me to say here is the definition of domestic violence under this act is so broad,
Hmm.
is so broad that if you think it is violence, then it is violence.
Right.
And there is no strict onus of proof because it's not a criminal law.
Hmm.
She is approaching court to kind of say, I am facing violence, and that's enough. Because the whole focus of this act is on the relief. So you can literally say anything, and it is not. So what I do in my trainings is I could finish it in one line. I could just finish what is domestic violence in one line to say that if you think it's violence, it is violence.
Right. Right. And very often, like you
And I
said, the
think all
recognition
women
of this.
here, yeah, and I think all women here should kind of really internalize this statement. Spend a minute to just internalize this statement. There is, is this violence? Is that violence? You don't need to question it. If you think it is violence, then it is violence, and you have every right to approach the court for a relief from that violence.
Right. I also feel, Audrey, what you said earlier around recognition of the violence, right? Sometimes you're so culturally conditioned, and disabled people or disabled women are even more conditioned around, oh, there is someone who has accepted you, someone who's taking the burden off your families. And these are all the stigmatized language that's used, right? And also around, it's okay if someone abuses you because they're at least helping you or quote unquote accepting you or quote unquote loving you when you're absolutely unlovable and undesirable. So I think those additional layers, so you spoke about what, the kinds of layers of pressure that women face, just to add the layers of pressure that disabled women face around. And I'm sure any other woman with very marginalized situations, identities, etc., would be facing her own unique challenges. So, a couple of questions quickly to ask you, Audrey. Here, one of the questions was: is this applicable? Is this law? Does this cover girlfriends as well? I know you've kind of responded, but if we can still quickly, briefly respond to this question.
Yeah. Not girlfriends. There is this myth that live-in relationships are covered, That's not how the law defines it. It is the women who are covered are, the term used is in the nature of marriage. When I say in the nature of marriage, is that in society, you are living as husband and wife. So Nidhi, a lot of us have marriages that are not really legal for whatever reasons, right? And this man has a wife in the village, and then he comes to the city, and then he does some sindoor or whatever to this woman, and then they're living together, and then they have children. Everybody around thinks that they're husband and wife. So women who are in a relationship which is in the nature of marriage are covered under the law. Girlfriends are not covered under this law. But like I have said right in the beginning of my session, that the Constitution ensures that none of us as citizens of India can be abused. No one has the right to abuse us. And so with or without this law, and I've always said this, before the Domestic Violence Act came, before the 1983 Act came, I was too young to say it, but I'm sure people before me have said it, that we are protected by the Constitution. No one has a right to abuse anyone, and we can always, as a girlfriend, as a friend, as a bystander, whatever, you can approach the police if anybody abuses you, and please do that. Please stand up against that abuse.
Right.
There's one more thing I want to share, Nidhi, is the other program that Majlis does is on sexual violence, and maximum of our sexual violence cases are that of children.
Right.
And most of them, I would say, so we do all the cases of rape that are registered with the Mumbai police, right? So we really have an eye view of every case that is registered. So I'm talking about reported cases. 73% are children, and 90% of that 73% of the rape happens in the home.
Right.
Okay, so you're talking about fathers, brothers, uncles, mamas, very close relatives, very close family, very close neighbors who are committing these acts of sexual violence.
Right.
And then when we looked further at our cases, we realized that these girls had some kind of disability too. And that increased their vulnerability.
Right.
They couldn't study, so they were at home, or something was happening. So this abuse, domestic violence abuse, and the sexual abuse goes so hand in hand in some way. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we have questions around that, abuse and sexual abuse at home. So one of the questions is around marital rape, and how will you prove that under the PWDA? And I'm also going to ask the next question so that I can reply in whichever order, is around intimate partner violence. And intimate partner violence, I think you did say that the PWDA covers that. But the question is that, would it be covered in America? It's counted, intimate partner violence is considered within. So if you wanted to repeat that response and then talk about how to prove marital rape.
So again, I'm going to say, I know that we always start our idea of accessing justice with this thing about, and only women have this pressure, right? How am I going to prove it? How am I going to prove rape? How am I going to prove domestic violence? How am I going to prove, that I was violated? How will I prove sexual abuse? But we have moved so far from this whole thing about notion of proof. And I think we have to stop worrying about proving, because we are our own proof. Our body is that proof. Our statement is that proof. And we have enough Supreme Court and High Court judgments which kind of stand with us to say that her statement is the most important statement.
Right.
So please don't be burdened, at least under the Domestic Violence Act. See, in a criminal
Proof of
case,
burden.
it's very difficult because there somebody is going to be incarcerated, they're going to be in jail, and so judges are more careful about proof and onus of proof, etc. But in a civil litigation like the Domestic Violence Act, please don't worry about proof, because we never had proof. How
Right.
will you prove marital rape? How will you prove verbal abuse?
Okay.
How will you prove emotional abuse? So I feel that if you are feeling violated and you really want to access the reliefs under the act, let not this be the barrier.
Right.
Do not
Right.
worry about proof. Because what are
So
you saying? You are saying, give me maintenance. You are saying, give me residence. You are saying, give me a protection order for the future. You're asking for the future, which he's anyway supposed to provide. So no loss for anyone.
right. Right, right. So I think this is the next question as well. One of the questions is how do we, again, it's around proof, and that's why I'm clubbing here. It's, when you live with an invisible disability, how do you prove? So I'm not very sure she's talking about proving the violence, accessing some sort of support in terms of disability. I'm just trying to understand, because like you're saying, you don't need to prove the violence. You are the proof, and your statement is the proof. So do you want the participant who's asked this question, would you want to unmute yourself and sort of explain the question, or if you can type it in personal message or in the group chat, explaining a little more? If there's any additional layer around invisible disability and sort of a doubt around that. Audrey, I had a question. If and I know that Majlis has dealt with and supported so many cases of disabled children or disabled people. How do we access support? Like, if there is a deaf woman or a sign language user who wants to file a complaint, or just give her statement, etc. Can we ask for an interpreter, because we know that some of the later laws make some provisions around women with disabilities? So in this 2005 Act, how do we access some of those supports that may be needed officially?
So one is that you can always make an application to the court. It's not provided in the law, but it's very easy to, the way we make applications for women all the time, right? Like requesting something. So we can make an application to the court requesting an interpreter, a translator, wheelchair assistance, anything that you need. Now, we can ask the state to provide it if we can't afford it, or we can mention that we have somebody who will help in the process. So I don't feel that anybody should deny themselves access to this law. And if they need support, then their representative can make an application to the court of what is it that they require.
Right, right.
And then they can request that the court provide it, or they have somebody who will come to do the needful.
Right. And that's not a complicated process.
No. See, Nidhi, you must always remember there are certain legislations which are called beneficial legislations. In a beneficial legislation, the court is mandated to look at it from the victim's point of view, from the aggrieved person's point of view. And they are given permission, the judges are literally given permission to interpret the law in that manner.
Right.
We have section 27 in the law, which actually gives the judges, the lowest judges, that is the magistrate court, the power to interpret this so as to provide maximum relief to the victim.
Right, right.
So
Okay.
we should not restrict ourselves. We should open ourselves and test it out.
Right. Audrey, there's another question around invisible disabilities, to say that when there's emotional abuse and you live with an invisible disability, again, I think there's this piece around proving, particularly when families are not supporting, that you go and seek justice. So when you live with an invisible disability, you're being emotionally abused. How do you prove it, particularly when families are not supportive? So this is one question, and we have another around um, how much time does this process take? I remember you saying that it takes longer, but somebody's asking that how quickly do we get the judgment in court?
So, like I said, the law says 60 days. I have cases running for like 3 years.
Right.
But what we do at Majlis is we try to get what you call the interim order. And that for me is the judgment really, because I really don't care after that how long this will take. You know, so final judgment does not become the goal. Ensuring that we get an interim order as quickly as possible is what we push for, so that she's protected. And then however long the trial goes, it doesn't matter because she's protected. Because at the end, this is something that she will get. The final order will become the interim order, give and take some.
And the question again around emotional abuse and not being supported by families. Do you have some response to that?
So here's the reality. You know, families never support, and here you're fighting against the family, right? So even if there is a supportive family, they will restrict you from actually going to court, because Marathi मध्ये एक आहे ना की कोर्टाची पायरी कधी चढायचं नाही. Never climb the steps of the court, because even if it's a supportive family, they will dissuade you, and if it is an abusive family, obviously they're not going to support. So this is the reality, and that's why I'm saying that unless each one of us take on that mandate to support someone else and be there for that person, how is she going to access it? Person without disability, it is so difficult because of the layers and layers and layers of kind of stigma and everything attached to it. Person with disability, how much more difficult? So each one of us will have to kind of take it on ourselves to support somebody to kind of reach out and then access the system.
Right. Okay. I think either having that support system or accessing support networks in case families, in the majority cases where families are not supportive, is extremely important. I'm just going to ask one more related question and then go to one of the questions that participants have put in here. Audrey, how accessible or open are shelter homes and in cases particularly of domestic violence? Because like you said, you're living in that environment and you're filing a case against the family, whether it's your, you know, birth family, adoptive family, matrimonial family, wherever you are, right? So I think it's extremely important to just understand if shelter homes are an option at all, and how do we find the list and how do we go there. So we have one hand raised and one more question, but before that, this question here. Right. So basically it's difficult, right? The shelter homes are not geared towards women who want to exit violent situations. It may be specifically for women who want to exit sex work or who have been rescued from trafficking or something else, but it's not really geared towards domestic violence survivors, and definitely not. Environments are very vast and varied and diverse, but definitely not accessible and inclusive. So even bigger challenge for women with disabilities: what if the man does not have the capacity to compensate or make the financial payments that are being asked for, as relief? I'm just paraphrasing some of the questions, but this is what the question says.
So again, here, like I said, the firstly, the maintenance is decided based on two things: the need of the woman. What is her monthly expenses? What is her need between her and her children? What does she require to sustain herself as per her standard of living? And then it looks at the capacity of the man to pay. So it's not in isolation. It's not a random order from somewhere. If I am a domestic help living in, in a slum, and my husband is a rickshaw driver and his capacity to pay is like twice mine, and the judge will look at all these factors and decide what maintenance I should get. So it won't be out of the purview of what his standard of living is.
Right. Okay. So thank you for that. I think we have one more question around what if I'm being abused by my mother or sister? Will that fall under the law? I think that's the complete question, because somebody's typed, what if I'm being abused by my mother or sister?
So we in the initial law it was not included, but there was a Supreme Court judgment that addressed this issue of being abused by your mother and sister. And there and in so earlier what was included was husband and his relatives. But now with the latest Supreme Court judgment, mother and sister is also included.
Right. Thank you so much. So this is by another participant, and this is the last two questions that we're taking. That maybe I feel that the problem is not only the lack of awareness, but that complaints are not being filed, which I think, Audrey, you're saying all along, that's. I think you've said this, so I don't know if you want to add something to it.
Yeah, I think that's the saddest part. We have both Nidhi and I would have sat in many, many meetings campaigning for law, drafting law, thinking how we can include this, how we can include that, this will help, that will help. But I think somewhere we lost the plot. And while law is very, very, very important as a tool, the need for people to want to use that tool becomes very critical. And the problem is the stigma attached to family. And what you must understand is that as a country, we have very sad and very inferior social security. The only security we have is our family. Who else is there? The same family who we are dependent on for love, attention, everything, is the family is also the abusive family. And it's this dynamic that makes it so complex for women to take that step.
Right. Quickly, Audrey, sorry, last question here, and I think someone had their hand raised. We'll ask them to briefly submit their question if it's not already answered. Why can't a photo or a WhatsApp chat be submitted rather than, a photo or a conversation on WhatsApp be submitted as a basis rather than a formal complaint? I think they're again talking about proof. No, actually filing a formal complaint. So I'm not sure, how do we address this?
So no, it cannot be done, because as you know that there has to be a signatory to the application, and it comes through a form. Under the Domestic Violence Act, there are specific forms that have to be filled by the protection officer, and it requires the person who's making the application to agree to want to do this. Otherwise, I will make an application for you, but you don't want to do it. So your signature becomes extremely important. Like, otherwise, nobody will know who is filing for who. So that's why we have a term called, where you are, where somebody notarizes for you. that
Right.
I am this person and I want to make this application.
Right, right. Um, so just quickly, I think, and I can answer the next question. What if a person with a disability abuses their partner with a disability, regardless of, I think, regardless of who the perpetrator is? I don't think any law says that a disabled person cannot be the perpetrator of violence. So I think that's a myth, and that's why I'm taking it here, because we've seen this in sexual abuse cases, sexual harassment cases, domestic violence cases. In every case, we somehow, carry on, even within our communities, the myth that disabled people are angelic, divine, inspirational, motivational, positive, and they can never be any of either the abusers or harassers or anything. And that's why we miss out on trusting the person who files the complaint even more. And we really are at a loss within our community and beyond as a society because of this myth. Yeah. Right. Thank you so much, Audrey, and thank you everyone for participating and asking so many questions. It's really important for us to know our rights, and that's why this whole series around understanding violence and really thinking about what's stopping us, right? Is it not knowing the violence? Is it not recognizing the violence? Is it normalizing the abuse, right? Is it really this sort of space where we're not able to um, we're not able to access the law because we don't know about it, or we're not able to access because we live with a disability, or we're a woman, or we're a gender marginalized person? So really thinking about these questions, finding out answers, is extremely important. The more we build our knowledge, the more we'll be able to move forward in a safe manner, in a protected manner, and with our rights intact. So thank you everyone for joining us today for the second part of our 3-day series of My Rights, My Safety. Thank you so much. Thank you, Audrey, for a fantastic session. For there are many thank yous in the chat box for you, and much appreciation for your time, for bringing so many varied perspectives, for going back in time and telling us where did this struggle begin? How did the law support us? How can we access the law? And really, what stops us the most from accessing justice? Thank you for your time, Audrey, and thanks to Majlis as an organization, and to you as an individual, for coming here and spending this hour and a half with us.
My Rights, My Safety, a workshop series on people with disabilities and the law by Rising Flame. Below this are Rising Flame's website and social media links. Website risingflame.org, Instagram risingflame_now, Twitter Rising Flame Now, Facebook Rising Flame Now.